Well, I've got 7 o'clock. We might as well get started.
Okay.
All right, good evening. My name is Brent Kunderlein, the local president for the Ice Age Floods Institute, Wenatchee Valley Erratics chapter here in Wenatchee. Looks like we got about 33 people, and then the three of us, including our speaker, myself. Just wanted to talk about a couple things before we get on to Bill's talk here tonight, and maybe we've been kind of rambling on about it a little bit, but anyway, it's pretty exciting. This week I received a couple of big boxes from the National Park Service, and they have finalized and sent out the Ice Age Floods National Geologic Trail brochure. They call these omni-grid maps. So whenever you go to a national park like Mount Rainier or Yellowstone, or a national monument like Devil's Tower or something like that, they hand you, when you go to up to the visitor center or up to the entrance gate, they hand you a pamphlet, and that's typically one side has got a map on it of the monument or park or whatever, and the other side's got information about it, and that's exactly what the Park Service has just finished. So this Unigrid, they released it just last week, and so my hope is that we are going to have an in-person meeting on August 9th next month, and that I will bring a bunch of these with me to the meeting, and you'll all get one in your hands before you leave that meeting. So anyway, just want to let you know about that, and just kind of that's a little segue into our next meeting, which will be August 9th, 2 months from tonight. We'll have the pleasure of having Timothy Connor. He is a journalist from the Spokane area, and has just published a book called Beautiful Wounds, and it's about the Wenatchee, or about the Washington's channeled scablands. And in conjunction with that book release, he has opened a small exhibit at the Wenatchee Valley Museum and Cultural Center, and that's on the second floor, just past the railroad, the model railroad, on the left-hand side as you're going down the hall. Anyway, Timothy is an excellent photographer. He took all the photos that are in the book, and probably about 15 of those photos are displayed on the exhibit at the museum, and they're actually up for sale too. So if you want to go and take a look at that. But on the 9th, what the plan is to have Timothy do another PowerPoint presentation, and during that time, and his book will be available, and if people want to buy it, he'll sign it for you at that point. And if people want to go and take a look at the exhibit, he's agreed to leave up the exhibit until after our meeting on the 9th. And then a short time after that, it'll be taken down. So anyway, I think that's about all I have to say about that, but hopefully we can get through the rest of the pandemic, COVID stuff, and not have to, and actually have an in-person meeting. So, and for those that are not comfortable with coming to an in-person meeting, I mean, you can wear masks, we're not, that's just fine, but the plan is also have a Zoom connection associated with that meeting too. So that's about all I have to say about that. So tonight we have Bill Burgle. He retired in 2010 after a 40-year career with the railroad industry. He got a bachelor's degree in engineering from the University of Michigan in 1971, and then a master's in structural geology from Idaho State University in 1986. But that later degree kind of stemmed from all the geological work that he started doing, working for the railroads over the years with landslide and earthquake prevention and so forth and so on. So he's worked on projects all over the Pacific Northwest and Oregon, Washington, helped out with the TriMet and the Sound Transit in Seattle. So, but one of Bill's hobbies is kayaking. And so what he's agreed to do for us tonight is to take us on a tour of the floods features along the Columbia River on a kayak trip that he took from basically Grand Coulee Dam down to the Willamette River. So without any further ado, we would like to introduce Bill and have him give his presentation. Thank you.
You're muted, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I just was saying, I was thanking Brent and Teresa from the museum for helping me put this on, and I do appreciate the opportunity to share this little kayak trip with y'all. I'll go right on into it. Takes about 45 minutes to zip through it, and then I do leave time for some questions, and I think Brent was saying you either can put them in the chat or in the Q&A. So we'll go from at that point in time. But yeah, this is basically the Columbia up by Chief Joseph's Dam near Brewster, near Bridgeport, Washington, just north of you guys. And over the years, I've done a fair amount of kayaking along the Columbia, and I always have a camera ready. I did want to at least thank, let's see, I'm trying to advance this here. See how to do this here. Oh, there we are. I did want to make sure I hadn't cleared this with Brent beforehand, but this is the brochure he was referring to. And as he said, it just came out, and it's National Park sponsored. You can see the leaflet or the brochure in the lower right-hand corner, but it looks pretty comprehensive. And over in this, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this talks about some of the features that are featured in this brochure, but they include the Glacial Lake Missoula, Drumheller Channels, the Ginkgo Petrified Forest, Grand Coulee, Great Gravel Bar of Moses Coulee, Wallua Gap, Crown Point, and then the Willamette floodplain. But I start with all my talks with a quiz just to kind of keep you interested. So, and I don't give the answer until we get to the end, but what feature of the Missoula floods was responsible for Oregon becoming a state much sooner than the other 17 Western states is one question I asked, and this was to an Oregon audience. But given this is state of Washington, I also added a second question, which is why it took another 30 years before Washington became a state. And believe it or not, the river right outside your door there in Wenatchee played a role in this decision. So those are things to think about as we zip through this presentation. But as far as kayaking goes, all those, except for those thin blue sections, which I have not done, and I'm planning on doing the one up by Wenatchee this summer. But most of the rivers, from Grand Coulee down, I've kayaked. And I basically do it with either myself or with groups. And most of this trip I've done by myself here. We'll get into that. The Columbia itself is quite a legacy. In 1775, the Spanish discovered, they think they discovered it, didn't really report it to too many, but Robert Gray in May of 1792 crossed the bar, and about 5 months later, George Vancouver crossed the bar as well. And that time difference was critical in terms of what whether it was going to be a U.S. or a British province. Neither of them told each other about their discoveries and the fact that they laid claim to the Columbia. Robert Gray claimed something over around Camas, Washington, and George Vancouver claimed something over by the Sandy River Delta that Lewis and Clark had named the Sandy River subsequent to George Vancouver's visit. I have the British in red and the Americans in black, and this color code, and the Spanish in green. But the Columbia was pretty well documented by David Thompson. He did the heavy lifting in terms of coming down the river. The Astor Hunt Party just joined it there at. They came overland through Hermiston and joined it there, and came down and set up Fort Vancouver. And then I highlight Marcus and Narcissa Whitman. Narcissa Whitman, if you haven't had the opportunity to read her history, it's well worth spending the time, energy to. She was really the one who got the migration on the Oregon Trail started. She sent back letters after letter talking about her journeys across the Oregon Trail back in 35, and it really set the tone. I could do a talk on her next time you guys want a historical talk, but she's fascinating, and the role she played in the migration on the West. And Nick's talked about T.W. Simmons and his study, and then later on, the commercial use of the river kind of dictated. David Thompson, like I said, he did basically the heavy lifting. He explored the Kootenai River and then the Columbia River. His survey marks, they rechecked them a few years ago, and they were within 5 inches of the place where he surveyed up in the Spokane area. And I allude to that. My take on that is he was probably spot on, and the 5 inches was probably the continental drift that was the plate, the movement of the North American plate to the west was probably the difference of the 5 inches there. This is Simmons' survey with the blue and the Columbia, and then the orange outline is Glacial Lake Lewis that he noted back in '82. And this book here is quite a Bible. If you haven't got your copy, this is really worth it's really worthwhile picking this up. Jim O'Connor has written one of the pieces in there, and he talks about arc versus river, which is something Nick Zentner's talked about. And the Columbia is pretty special in that it's the only continental scale river that transects an active volcano arc as it cuts through this chain of volcanoes. And Jim goes on to say it pits the magmatic and the tectonic advances against the power of a river. And as he says, and you'll see it time and time again in this show, that the river usually wins. Nick had a talk Northrop Canyon not too long ago, and he pointed out this battle between the Columbia River flood basalts up here on the horizon, shoving up against the 72 million year old granite that basically the Columbia River is migrated just off the scene here. But you have that constant battle going on here. When the flood basalts hit this area, as most of you know, you got Northrop Canyon, where Nick was a minute ago, up here in the yellow, and just the displacement of the Columbia River by the flood basalts was pretty much mimicked also in the Snake River Plain. You have the same battle going on with the Snake River Plain flood basalts shoving the Snake River to the south. Yeah, Paul, I wish you could talk here, but it's not an old story. I mean, some of these calderas, this is Crater of the Moon up in here, but some of these calderas that the Yellowstone hotspot migrated through here were in this area. We're in the 10 million years old, 6 million years old up in this area here. So it's much more recent than the 16 million year old Columbia River basalts up north. But the same thing happened in Snake River Plain. You have the basalt shoving the Snake River up against the Basin and Range Mountains there, which were just coming up from an extensional basis there. And then you also have the same phenomena along the Columbia River, as well as the Bonneville floods, as Jim O'Connor pointed out. Again, the largest floods, Missoula floods, are in the upper right-hand corner, but just below is the Bonneville flood, which was right in that same time zone. And here's a few shots of some of the Snake River Plain, where all the water of the that flowed from Glacial Lake Bonneville up at Red Rock Pass and flowed down through the Snake down through Twin Falls. And again, where erosion was constricted and where it was constricted, and deposition where it widened out. But this is an aerial view of the Twin Falls area, where you had these two flows. Basically, the flow of the Bonneville flood bifurcated just upstream at Burley, and this is looking upstream, where basically you had about 40% of the flow of the flood upstream from Twin Falls, but downstream you can see it did a number on there where you had 100% of the Bonneville flood flowing through here. And Susan mentioned that Jim gave you guys a talk about Bonneville flood not too long ago, but this is some of the shots along the Snake River Plain, which is I kayaked this quite a bit when I was at Idaho State, but there's a guy jumping off the bridge, the Perrin Bridge, if you ever decide to do some paragliding there. Another shot, again, it widens out, and so you get depositional horizon. And again, this is your arc versus river, where you've got this basalt just shoving the Snake River way to the south along the deal. And then you have the same phenomena here where you have the glacial floods intermixing just south of Lewiston, a place called Tammany Bar. And you've got the rough, you're about 500 miles from Red Rock Pass here, and about 250 miles from the ice dam up on Lake Pend Oreille to meet this point. But you're in a kind of a backwater here with the Missoula floods, where this was the main channel coming down for the Bonneville floods. So you can see that in the rock size in the silt. This is an aerial view of Lewiston, and I've circled where I think that Tammany Bar is. That's Atlas sand and gravel there, and looks like that. I think that previous picture was from Tom Foster, and he would basically, I think he probably got permission to get in there, and we would have to do the same. But the reason I kind of mentioned a little bit about the Snake River and because Flint, who was antagonist against Bretz back in 38, he basically he used the scablands in the Snake River as a reason that Bretz's floods didn't necessarily have to be catastrophic, which is kind of it's ironic because in the end he uses this example that I just showed there at Shoshone Falls and Twin Falls as a reason he considered that to be carved by leisurely process, I think he says in the text here. So I thought that was, he says, I'm not aware of any unusual floods that have been held to affect the upper Snake River Valley or river. So as you know, the process was the same in both cases, and as Brett has proved to be correct in this. And then Brett's, as you know, we're using his knowledge all over the universe, thanks to Vic. Well, let's get back to the kayaking here. Thanks for indulging me a little bit on my history down on the Snake River as well. But you know, in the blue circle is pretty much where I'm talking about on this talk here, and that's only a 16,000-year-old story from the Missoula floods. Again, in that yellow bracket is where I'm going to talk about. And most of you guys know the story, so I'm not going to really elaborate here. But you know, you first had the first lobe up here come down the Purcell Trench and block off the Snake River, excuse me, the Clark's Fork River up there by Pend Oreille. And the resultant flood was down the main channel of the Columbia River. And that was a pretty good sized flood, as we all know. And basically shot through here. You have to imagine this Okanagan lobe hasn't advanced here yet. And then the Okanagan lobe advanced partially, as we know, and basically it diverted away from the main channel between Chief Joseph Dam and Moses Coulee, just south of Wenatchee. So basically it formed there, and then later on, Okanagan lobe advanced all the way to Grand Coulee, and you know the pattern that resulted from that. And then here's a couple of pictures. Again, Nick had a talk about the other day with Jerome Lessman that talks about the origin of the Okanagan lobe way up here by Kelowna. And then he, you know, the discussion was, you know, where and how did that all drain? And it was Jerome's opinion on Nick's show that most of it drained to the south, and that basically could have added quite a bit of water to the flood scenario. Over on the right is basically the extent of the Okanagan lobe out of this paper, and then here's basically the route of the Columbia River as it is today. Another shot of the glacial erratics that are up on top of the Waterville Plateau, and again another shot of that basically the thickness of that glacial lobe through there, and this is up on top of the Waterville Plateau, and you can see that the you know the height of that ice sheet was quite a bit over the Columbia, and there's a paper by Tamara Pico, I think, that talks about the isostatic depression that resulted from this glacial advance. I'm finally going to get to my kayaking story. So I went back in August of 2020 to see my son in Boston, and my wife said, well, you know, you can't come, you know, after I flew home, she says, well, you can't come into the house. You got to go. Don't you want to go kayak by yourself for a while and quarantine while you're doing so? So I agreed, and I rented a car and put my kayak on top and drove up here to put my kayak in here just downstream from the Grand Coulee Dam. And this is pretty much a roadless area, but it actually was pretty. You'll see from these pictures that it's actually not a bad place to kayak. There's a couple of limiting factors that I'll talk about when we get into it. But basically, it's about 45, 50 miles long, and the current moves pretty good through here. It's this is a run of the river reservoir behind Chief Joseph, so whatever the Grand Coulee's putting out, you basically, it's gonna have to go through Chief Joseph. It's not gonna be able to linger around. And so you have somewhat of a flow through here. They averaged about 4.5, 5 miles an hour. Typical for a sea kayak is about 2.5 to 3 miles an hour. So the current did help. And I did this stretch in just a couple of days. This is basically the road system that it shows in this area. Here's Brewster, Teresa, where she's from, and Pateros, Bridgeport, and then Grand Coulee over here on the right-hand side of the map. And So the idea is when I kayak is I leave a bicycle down at the takeout, and then I drive to the put-in upstream and put my kayak in the water, and then basically boat back to my bike, and then leave my kayak here, and then bike back to the car. And Nick mentioned the other day about the Grand Terrace. He had to talk about the elevation of the Grand Terrace, and he basically alluded to the fact that there wasn't a lot of work done on these terraces along the system. So subsequently, I went through and just tried to label. This isn't rigorous stuff, but just where these elevations are in terms of elevation above sea level here. So I threw that on most of this trip. So I drove up to Grand Coulee Dam. It's certainly it's the largest, one of the largest dams in the world, and certainly in the U.S., and the largest producer of hydropower. It doesn't have a fish ladder, which I know we bought off the folks up in Canada with those treaties, and I know they're due for renewal here in 2024, and I don't know how that's going to work out. But Irwin back in '38 did the geology and pretty much nailed all those geology from what they knew at the time. But he certainly found the granite down there to pin the dam into, and all that is quite evident downstream, which is where I put in. It's about 5 miles south of Grand Coulee along the river, and basically the Grand Terrace, its elevations down here is about 1250 to 1270 foot above sea level, and we're up along this Nespelem Terrace, which is in the literature. That was at a different terrace level, about 1070 feet above sea level. A lot of boulder trains along here, and there's as you drive to the put-in at Seaton's Bar, there's several of those. Here's an aerial shot of that. Here's the road going to the put-in. But all these boulders, to the greater extent, they're mostly well-rounded, and mostly of the entablature section of the Columbia River basalt. So it pretty much stayed intact rolling along there. And this is the reservoir at Lake Rufus Woods where you put in. And I just left my car here and shoved off about 10 in the morning. Right away, you come into some of these boulder trains as you float on down. And the grouping is such that, I puzzled about if you folks have ideas, whether they seem to be concentrated where you had a drainage of some kind. And there's certainly, I don't know that they had much to do with the Columbia River, but, because the Columbia River, used to flow further down in its trenched valley there. So anyway, that's some of these boulder bars that, there's probably 11 or 12 of these concentrations between Grand Coulee and Bridgeport. So they were quite remarkable, as was this lake bed sediment that's just downstream. About 8 or 10 miles from the put-in, and I didn't spend time looking at the fine grained sediment. I know that Sky Cooley spends a lot of time looking at that, and so does Brian Atwater, but I just kind of paddled on by. Maybe next time I'll take a little further time looking at these lake beds. It seemed to be varved, and so it certainly seemed to be the silt from a lake bed. You also have this arc versus river issue all along, where you have the Columbia River basalt just sitting there on the south bank of the Columbia all the way through here, and the previous in 24, the hydrologists that went down there did a pretty good job of marking out all the rapids here. And there was a rapid at this location. that seemed to be formed, in my humble opinion, that by this landslide that was there. Again, some more boulder bars along there. As you can see, they're quite they stand out quite a bit. The lake itself, and this is one of the reasons it might be a little bit sketchy to kayak down here, is there's no the lake hasn't been there long enough to cut any benches or beaches to where you could camp. So camping, I did find a few spots to set up a tent. You'll see where I ultimately figured out where I could camp. But it was basically, there's not much of a strand line cut yet by the lake, and it's pretty it's not running water, so to speak. It's pretty much impounded, so not too many beaches along this stretch. But there are fish farms, and there's about 5 or 6 of them, and they're fairly unpleasant to camp by. So don't plan on camping by because of the smell these things emit. There's another reason I was going to pull over for lunch here, but that didn't work. This guy let me know that well, he was probably as scared of me as I was of him. So I just kept on going. Made it down to some of these fine grained lake bed sediments along here. This is a Google Earth shot of that same outcrop. And I'm up here about, I've gone about 15 miles to date, or by this time of day, and some coarse bed sediments. Here's a close-up of that same photo. It looks like, once the lake, I'm going to guess that the lake bed sediments were impounded behind the advance of the glacier or the Okanagan lobe. Of course, the Okanagan lobe might have filled the whole valley here too, but at some time you had an impoundment there, and then you had a subsequent flood, Missoula floods down the main stem here. So we're up in that area where both probably occurred. You've got some of this fairly uniform scree deposits, from the north side, mostly crystalline rocks from the migmatite that's up in that area. Quite a few drop stones. These are some of the larger ones. And then some varved that you can pull over and take a look at this. Medium-sized drop stones that must have dropped off of out of the lake that was there from the icebergs. Another drop stone, some of this very fine grained stuff with some small clast in it. Another drop stone. This is looking south at some of this terracing that you see come along. It's a beautiful river to kayak along. Not too many power boats. Again, it takes a couple, 3 days to float down through here. Certainly less if you have current, which this first day I did have. So I migrated at least far as the star is on this first day, and moving right along with these boulder bars, some of this fine grained sediment with some old soil horizons in there with bedding. Looked to me like an ash layer in there again. Looks like it'd be a good master's thesis to come along here and do a lot of this work that I don't think too many folks have been down in here. I know that Sky Cooley just a couple of months ago went out there with Richard Wade and Brian Atwater, but I just heard about that. This is as far as I got that first night. They had set up this campground for kayakers and boaters and that sort of thing, but I don't think anybody stayed there in the last 6 or 7 years. It was pretty rough looking. and ran into a rattlesnake on shore. And so I decided to camp out on the dock, which again, nobody bothered me all night. But given the rattlesnake and given the bear, I set up a paddle there on the gate, figuring that if the bear came along, he would make a racket and at least wake me up. So that's the reason for the paddle there. Again, the CRB contact up on top of the 72 or the older rock, and this if you're looking north and you look at the highlands, you can see it. This is the extent of the Columbia River basalt, and the basalt probably ran up against this, and so did the Columbia River. And all these mountains here turn the river to the south as I'm getting close to Chief Joseph now. Here's a kind of a fluid kind of emplacement, kind of almost like a lahar, a mud flow type thing. Getting close to the takeout. This is the only, when you get on the south side of the river, there's a couple of places you put in on the north side, but this is on the south side, Brant's Landing, which is just upstream from where I take out here. This is Chief Joseph. And basically this is the valley to the right of this picture is where the Okanagan lobe came down from Canada through there. And so I made it in 2 days, moving along. Again, it was pretty good the first day for current. The second day, you could tell they weren't generating any hydro power. I think it was on a weekend, so there was very not much flow in the river. So I only averaged about 3 miles an hour coming out. But then I met the river ranger there, and he watched over my kayak. And by the way, if you ever get a chance and want to go up on one of his river patrols, he is very much he's very keen about geology. And so if you went up there and talked to him, I've got his name and number, and he would definitely escort anybody that wants to go up this river. On his daily patrol, he goes up about 35 miles and patrols the river as part of the Corps engineers, management of the Chief Joseph Dam. So he's a geologist wannabe. He watches Nick on the rocks all the time. So he and I kind of hit it off, geologically speaking. Chief Joseph Dam was built, back in the 50s, and it's the second largest hydropower producer in the U.S., and it used to be called the Foster Creek Dam, which is, as you guys know, is the source of the Moses Coulee, or one of the sources, I should say. Again, it doesn't have a fish ladder either, so it's the Nespelim River that flows into Lake Rufus Woods, is devoid of fish, at least adromatous fish. And basically it's, as I said, a run of the river dam, and they put a lot of this, they raised it about 10 feet a few years ago, and they get a lot more hydropower out of this. This is my sketch of the Okanagan lobe, and then basically you can see just west of Bridgeport, you got some highlands here. They're 2,600 feet above sea level here, and my thought is you had a Missoula flood occurrence basically occurred about when this Okanagan lobe was in this position, because your river, basically the flood came down the river and then exited the Columbia Gorge, or the route of the Columbia, at Foster Creek, and just south of here, it splits into 3 channels. You have the east fork of the Foster Creek that goes over to Lehigh Junction, where Nick was leading a trip, and then on down into Moses Coulee, and then you have a central, basically a central arm of Foster Creek that goes down towards Mansfield. And then you have a third one that comes over and actually rejoins the Columbia not too far from Pateros there, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But you can see this is the route I took on my bicycle up here. You climb a couple thousand feet on your way to Coulee City, or Grand Coulee, I should say. And this is where the Chief Joseph Dam was put in. So this area is no stranger to dams in that sense. But biking back, I dropped my kayak and got my bike and headed back and saw these lake bed sediments that are way up on top on East Foster Road. And then got my bike to the car, drove back to Bridgeport just as the sun was setting. And when I saw one of these haystacks, so I had to stop, take that picture. But that got me back down to Bridgeport, camped at the marina there, and next day drove my basically my car down to, or my bicycle down to Wells, or to Pateros is all I was going to go the next day, and then came back and put in and started down. This is me dropping the bicycle off, and there at Brewster across this bridge and go on down. And you've got again this the beginnings of what has been called the Great Terrace, right there by Brewster, and then the Okanagan Lobe came down this valley looking right at us about 15,000 years ago. This is looking back the other way towards Chief Joseph Dam. This is Bridgeport in the foreground, with Foster Creek leading towards Moses Coulee there. But this is the kayak from basically from Bridgeport down to Pateros. Yeah, it's just a beautiful float, and this is only about 17 miles. This was pretty easy to negotiate on a day, and had a pretty good current. And you can see behind Pateros, you have Alta Lake and all these terrace levels here. And I went through, and this is not a rigorous thing, but I threw in these elevations of this Great Terrace, which was bisected by different flows as well. This is going back, another shot of Pateros there, and in the top of the Great Terrace. And then I threw some LiDAR images here. It's a little easier to see the terraces there with the state of Washington LiDAR. You can see these flat surfaces up here, and this is one down by Alta Lake. So I basically camped in downtown Pateros, and the next day was forecast. Well, this is another shot of the Pateros and the different terrace levels. So I got to basically went back, bicycle back, got my car, came here, and they allow free camping on the city park there at Pateros. It's a lovely city. And I had just 5 miles was all I was going to do the next day for two reasons. One, there was a huge windstorm that was forecasted to hit this area about 9 a.m. on the next day. And I had 5 miles to go, and I averaged, if the water's flowing, easily 3 miles an hour. And I figured, well, I can do that 5 miles in the time, I got up, if I got up early. And so this is 6 a.m. in the morning, and you can see the flag is limp. And so with that, I drove my bike down to near the next dam down, which is Wells Dam, and then came on back and put my boat in the water and started down. And at first I was fine. This is probably about 7 a.m. and I figured I had 2 hours to get to to get to my bicycle. This is Wells Dam down here, and you can see the different terrace levels here. And this is kind of where one of the overflows from Foster Creek, West Foster Creek, tended to come up in this area here. You can see those different terrace levels there, and here's another shot from it, and you can see there's a caulk up on top here, and you got a scablands here, and you can see where it's split here. One flow of the scablands went down this way, and the other one came down this skeleton canyon. But anyway, Wells Dam, it does have a fish ladder, and it was built in '67. And you know, the whole idea of going up into Canada with all these dams. You can see over there on the Kootenai River, we have quite a few more dams. But you know, that's another shot there at Pateros, looking at that on my bicycle back to, and so I'm driving back to get into the car, and then I got out of the river in time, and then I got back to when I bicycled back. Here's what the wind was doing. So the windstorm was in full force, and I literally got off the river and just with maybe a half hour to spare. And that fire, or that wind, was also created all the fires up by Bridgeport that burned part of the town and advanced on Mansfield. And then as I got home, it burnt quite a few cities in Oregon, as I was to find out. This is when I got back to pick up my bicycle and the kayak. I had a hard time getting the kayak on the car, but you can see that would have been pretty stupid to be out there on the water. Yeah, you don't want to, you know, that whitecap condition is not a good place to be. But anyway, I was done with my trip, and saw all these clouds coming, so I decided to get out of town, but not before stopping at the Pateros Bakery. And you know, you owe it to yourself to go in there and grab something from this fine restaurant downtown Pateros. But I drove over Cascade, or the Highway 20 over the North Cascades, stopped at Alta Lake, and this is some of the detritus, the class that you see in the Grand Terrace. And then Alta Lake was carved by, you know, floods and glaciers up on top here, and you can see the smoke from the fires done beyond. So that was the end of my first trip. And then last year I decided to put in at Wells Dam, and then took out at down by just south of Wenatchee at the hydro park, Billingsley Hydro Park. So that trip I did with a few folks, and you know, off I went. Again, the Great Terrace there, more Great Terrace. Zip down into, there's lots of boulders along here. You can see that. The river does a good job of sorting. You get down closer to Chelan, you can see where it splits. One lobe goes up towards Lake Chelan, the other one down valley. Another shot of the LiDAR shot. You can see these terrace levels, you know, really jump out at you with LiDAR, and you can see that from a river level, you know, how this big glacier lobe kind of split itself in half there down by Chelan. And most of you guys know the story of that, Lake Chelan, where you can see the two glaciers. The Alpine Glacier advanced to about the Columbia River, probably even dammed the Columbia River. May have been one of the results of some of the, you know, the lake bed sediments there. But then the Okanagan lobe pushed it the other way and then melted it about where that star was. This is the river that drains the Lake Chelan. You can see the terraces looking east on the east bank of the Columbia there, and we got some CRB boulders that roll down from the east side. Another shot of the channelization of some of that, the first terrace. This is where we camped there at BB Bridge. More shots of some terraces. But it does dominate, the strand line of that terrace does dominate all through there. Good spots, good shots of the rock complexes on the west side of the river. Sorting of some of that, some of the had to be Missoula flood stuff. Earthquake Point, which is just upstream from you guys, and good shots of the ribbon rock there. Camp there, where I guess you had one of your field trips camped here not too long ago, but it was a beautiful state park, which is well signed in terms of the Missoula flood, and then the constriction of the Missoula flood at just south of Daroga State Park. Another LiDAR shot that shows some of the ripple marks up on top of that terrace up by where the highway is. You have this blockage there, or constriction in the Columbia, so you get this big eddy that sets up, and you get these depositional bars that you'll see again down by Rowena Crest, down by just below the Dells. Some more of the rock. This really didn't have anything to do with the Missoula floods. You got a boulder, CRB boulder that rolls down into near Turtle Island, and you got some of this Swakane biotite gneiss there at the rock. And I'm gonna basically I saw all this from a Google Earth, but I saw this this structure here, and I basically want to ask the group here. I'm sure you guys know what caused that, but I was in a dark as to what that long linear structure is about, and it looks like it comes down to the river level here in places. Another shot of the terraces and just above there, and then the sorting in the Wenatchee area was just downstream from. This is just about where the Wenatchee River comes into the Columbia. I was quite struck with some of this sorting and how clean these areas were. Looking west, and this is again some of the terracing on Pangborn Bar that you could see. It looked to me like the further downstream you go, it looked like the ripples were going both ways from that. I'll go through these pretty fast because this is familiar with most of you guys. Me being a freight train guy, I had to follow the freight trains out of Wenatchee, and knowing they had to climb up to Quincy Basin, so I followed those along. And shots of Moses Coulee coming into his way home, and then basically I really didn't get into back into the river. There's some of this strand line. I'll skip all through here. You guys have seen all this stuff. But I get down to this pattern ground down by Crescent Bar. And now this next stretch, I got about 5 more minutes and I'll be done here. But I did Hanford Reach several times, which is, where the Ringgold complex is located and deposit. And did that a few years ago, the Hanford Reach, which we picked a time with, I was with about 8 other kayakers, and we camped right along the Ringgold Formation. Right through there. Basically, these landslides are recent phenomena due to all the return water coming from the diversion from Grand Coulee. The nice thing about these landslides is they do give you places to set up camp, so they're nice. The Columbia River here is 50 miles. The first 25 miles moves really fast. You're moving about 6-7 miles an hour. You can see that the depositional regime changes all through here. It's another old landslide down towards getting close to Ringgold there. paddling through the Tri-Cities, where the snake comes in here. We camped down by where the Wallowa River comes in. Here's basically a LiDAR shot of the Wallowa Gap. And then basically there's probably 5 days a year you can kayak through Wallowa Gap, and we picked one of those dates. And it wasn't too bad with the pretty majestic hills up through the gap there, just all through there. It was just wonderful to kayak through there. Get down by Hat Rock and you break out into the where the Columbia swings to the west. Another trip I went up by where the Deschutes River comes into the Columbia, and this is Miller Island, which Nick's talked about these diagonal bands that go through the Columbia River basalt. And I think he was scratching his head, and so am I, about the origin of those diagonal bands. This is in the river where you're looking at the flow of the Missoula flood, basically right through this area. It's about 1,100 feet up, and you can see where it's dropping down into a place called Moody, which is the mouth of the Deschutes River. And this is the way it used to look at Salile there. This is all the so-called scablands where they built the bridge, which is right over Salile, near a portion of Salile Falls right there at the dam. And as you get downstream, you get to Fairbanks Gap, which is a big deal on the Columbia, or on the Oregon Trail, which was basically this red line was the Oregon Trail that cut down through here and went on into the Dells, which is just off the picture. But this is also a big diversion for the Missoula floods that came down through the Deschutes River and flowed all through here. Basically, when you're in the river there, this is right where we're at Rowena Crest. Was basically, you have about 1,000-foot water level there, and that's backed up through there. And then you have the sand deposits just downstream and some scablands. This is down by Horse Thief Lake. Colk's in that area. This is all land that's owned by Friends of the River, Columbia River Gorge. This is Jim Chase, who gives geologic tours down in that area. Another boulder train up there. A lot of pattern ground that the Friends of the Gorge, they own this property. And here's a picture of Lloyd giving a tour of the Ortley Thrust area. Rowena Crest, which is kayaked all this. Basically, that forms a big constriction there. Lots of fine grained sediments. There's a coal train coming from Powder River and goes up to export at Roberts Banks. And Lloyd took us up to see some fine grained sediments from the Missoula floods, just right there at Lyle. And basically, as you go on down, you see the strand lines and some glacial erratics down there by Mosier. And some Missoula flood deposits right along the Columbia. And then, as you know, the flood basically scoured out all the debris, so you could have waterfalls like we have. So basically, I'm going to wrap this up with the answer to the clue, which you probably figured out. You've got Missoula flood. Basically, it deposited all this rich farmland, which is really where all these pioneers off the Oregon Trail were headed. They wanted to get to the nice farmland there. And then the other question was, why did it take 30 years for Washington to become a state? And it was mainly because if you had a choice between settling in Oregon, which was sure to be American territory, versus settling north of the Columbia, which could have been British territory. You can see on this, the one with the box, England actually sought to annex all that area west and north of the Columbia River. They wanted that. And that's pretty much the way it was until Polk became president. And he said, well, he wanted to do this 54-40 fight, which you've heard, which would have been way up north by Prince Rupert. And, basically that was, he had no real intention of settling up there. And basically they, as you know, settled on the 49th parallel. But for 30 years after Oregon became a state, they basically could not decide. And part of that San Juan Island pig war, it kind of made the whole thing questionable as to when that would become a state. And then there was a hiatus in Congress for about 13 years where they didn't let any states into the Union. So that was the main reason that Washington didn't become a state for 30 years after Oregon. And with that, I'll end. So thank you. And I'll let Brent, I guess you read the questions, or do I, or what?
Okay, let me see if I can. I know there was well, it seemed like there was one about some geology, I guess, references or resources for the geology of this area. I guess one of the ones might be the roadside geology of Washington would be a good one. One of probably the most recent one. But
yeah.
I'm not.
That's why I use Marley Miller quite a bit. Yeah, it's roadside geology of. She wrote that, co-authored it with Daryl Cohen. Both are top-notch geologists. So yeah, if you get your hands on roadside geology of Washington, the new version, that's really what you want to have with you. And then anything by Bruce Bjornstad is going to be pretty accurate as well.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything else in the chat or oh, here's something in questions. Where can we see a more detailed basic report on the floods? I guess that would be, yeah, either Bruce's book or Gene Keever and Bruce Bjornstad Crow wrote a book together that up in this area. So on the Trail of the Ice Age floods, and then the second one is with Keever is the Northern Reaches, it's called, on the Trail of the Ice Age floods, the Northern Reaches by Bruce Bjornstad and Eugene Keever. So
right.
That's probably one of the better ones. I'm trying to think who else. Geology wise, it's probably the best one in this area.
Yeah, I think it showed 53 people signed were on the list here. So so that somebody asked how many folks were on here. So it shows 53.
It was up over 60 not too long ago. So people have checked out. I think it was about 63, Susan says. So
okay, thank you,
that
Susan.
Includes us three, Teresa, me, and you. So 60 of us. That's a pretty good crowd.
Yeah.
I guess other than that, I'm not. Let's see. Here's another one. How did you select campsites and adapt for weather?
Yeah, the weather turned out to be just golden. I mean, it was 100 degrees every day on the river, which for kayaking and when you're on a reservoir, the reservoirs are usually cold because they draw water from the bottom of a reservoir, so they. The water tends to be on the cold side, especially on this lake. Rufus Woods was definitely cold. So 100 degrees was quite bearable. anything between 65 and 100 is good. The key thing on kayaking on any of these lakes is the wind. So I really look at the wind patterns and get a forecast. And if it's only going to be good for one day, I won't go. But if I can see 2 or 3 days of calm winds or easterly winds or something that's a little bit anomalous, those are usually a good reason to go kayaking. So yeah, I subscribe to all these wind forecasts, so to speak, and then that's especially if I'm by myself. I don't really don't want to take any risk like that. But I have a pretty good kayak, and I have a spray skirt and all that, so I don't I'm pretty comfortable out there in big water and that sort of thing, and I just don't take chances out there.
And there's another question here from Mike L. It says, one of the slides showed lake sediments under flood deposits. How long was the lake there? This was one of your first segments of the trip, I think.
Well, the lake backed up pretty early. I mean, with that Okanagan lobe, the Okanagan lobe stayed in place for 3,000 years or so. 2000, from 15 or 18 to 15. That's actually something where I got to do some more research, Brent. But it was a pluvial stage, meaning there was a lot of water everywhere, and you had a lot of things changing, a lot of things going on, and Jerome Lessman was talking about. I mean, you had to melt the whole entire Okanagan lobe, and he's guessing that 75 to almost 100% of that water came south through that Great Terrace area. So I mean, you had a lot of flow that could have contributed to lake beds, ponding, terrace building, that sort of thing. So that whole timing hasn't been worked out, or needs to be worked out.
Yeah, we've got another one here from Ralph Dawes, who's the geology teacher at Wenatchee Valley College. He says, what do you think of the other interpretation of the stepped terraces sequence and Great Terrace from Chelan on upstream, which is that they formed alongside retreating or wasting away stages of the melting remnant of the ice sheet that was thickest over and melted last from the main Columbia Okanagan Valley. Some kettles on the terraces and what maybe ice contact structures in the sedimentary bedding might be seen as tending to support this.
Yeah, I was pretty much taken with that one. Basically, you saw where to me, it looked like a scabland that came up and over Foster Creek, the West Foster Creek, and then dropped down that Skeleton Canyon. And all right, so that kind of would have dated. I mean, there wouldn't have been a terrace there. So the terrace had to come subsequently. So, and this is not rigorous at all, Ralph, but my 2 cents worth is, you certainly had a retreating Okanagan lobe retreat back up where it came from, up north of Brewster there. And I think you had a hell of a lot of outwash, whether that filled the Columbia River Valley from rim to rim, is certainly debatable. But, I think once it retreated, and I could be all wet on this, but, you certainly, once it pulled back past Brewster, then it opened up the main stem of the Columbia for, subsequent Missoula floods that may have been the reason that cut these terraces. I would just be guessing. I would certainly rely on somebody a little more knowledgeable, such as yourself, on just what actually is going on up there.
Well, to answer your question about the structure on Turtle Rock, it's a fish hatchery. It's closed now, so
Oh, okay.
on the south end of Turtle Rock.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. I do not see any more questions, not see anything in the chat, so I think with that, thanks, Bill, for putting this on, and thanks for everybody attending and for your questions.
Yeah, it says there's a book, there's a one on LiDAR. A new question came in, Brent.
Okay,
You know, the LiDAR, the state of Washington's LiDAR program is exceptional. I employ that, every opportunity I get, and you can see from LiDAR, if you got any kind of planar services, they just jump out pretty clearly, and then you also think your ripples show up. So yeah, that I think if you're ever going kayaking, it's again, the state of Washington, you just type in Washington, state of Washington LiDAR, it comes right up, and it's very user friendly. And that work that I did here was, I basically, I think Nick was talking about it on one of his broadcasts not too long ago with Jerome Lessman, and that's kind of what tied me into trying to correlate these terraces, because this, if anything, from Grand Coulee down to Panghorn Bar, I mean, you've got terraces. I mean, they're just all over the place, and so that's a story that needs to be knitted together. And I just did a little, threw in a few data planes just to see if I could make sense of some of that, because Nick was suggesting that maybe the Great Terrace went all the way up to Grand Coulee was what Jerome was thinking, and the whole that whole area of all these terraces just need to be tied together. And I think that's definitely a master's thesis, or should be.
all right,
That's all I got.
okay, that's all I see. Thanks, Bill.
All right, I'll see you in a month or so, Brent.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you
Thanks
again.
for doing this.
You bet.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Teresa.